He was just out for a morning jog. No crime, no weapon, no warning. But in seconds, two police cars swerved in, guns pointed, and they slammed him to the ground. They thought he was a suspect. They had no idea he was a federal agent. And by the time they found out, it was already too late. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. He ran with steady steps, his breath controlled, the morning sun casting a soft glow on the quiet neighborhood. It was just a jog, the same one he took every day. Same route, same pace, same gray hoodie and dark sweatpants. His headphones rested around his neck, not in his ears. He liked hearing the world around him, but today the world didn't sound the same. The sharp screech of tires tore through the silence. Two police cruisers came from opposite sides and blocked the street ahead. Doors flew open, guns were drawn. Orders shouted, "On the ground! Hands where we can see them!" Derek stopped, confused. Both hands went up slowly. He didn't move fast. He had learned that quick movements could get you killed. He tried to speak, but before the words could come out, one officer rushed forward. A hard shove to the back. He hit the ground with a grunt, the pavement biting into his skin. A knee pressed against his spine, hands forcing his wrists together. Cuffs clicked tight. Another officer grabbed his ankles, twisting them like he was dangerous. Derek told them he was unarmed. They didn't care. Someone in the distance was yelling, a woman's voice. "Why are you doing this? He's just jogging." It was Jasmine, a neighbor who walked her dog every morning, but her voice was drowned out by police radios and commands. Officer Holt barked orders while Officer Reynolds dug through Derek's pockets. They moved with urgency, like they had caught someone dangerous. They said there had been a robbery nearby. They said he matched the description. "What description?" Derek asked, his voice calm. Neither officer answered. Holt laughed under his breath. "Yeah, they always run in hoodies." Derek didn't fight. He didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. He only said one thing, over and over again. "Check my back pocket." At first they ignored him, thought he was trying to pull something. But after backup arrived, Officer Calhoun and Sergeant Becker, they got curious. Reynolds reached into the back pocket of Derek's joggers. His hand froze. What he pulled out wasn't a wallet. It wasn't a phone. It was a federal ID. Thick, gold, official, a badge clipped to credentials. Homeland Security. Silence fell for the first time, the kind that made the air feel heavier. Holt's face drained of color. Becker stepped forward, snatched the badge, read it, then looked down at Derek like he was seeing him for the first time. And just like that, everything changed. For a few seconds, no one moved. The badge sat in Sergeant Becker's hand like a bomb that had just been armed. He stared at it, then at Derek, then back at the officers still holding him down. Holt's knee was still on Derek's back, but his weight had shifted, like he suddenly realized he was kneeling on someone who could ruin his entire career. Reynolds stepped back, his hands in the air as if trying to distance himself from the arrest he had just been part of. Becker's voice came out low, sharp. "Get him up! Now!" Reynolds moved first, fumbling with the cuffs, struggling like his fingers forgot how to work. Holt stood and took a single step back. Derek stayed still, waiting, his eyes steady on Becker. When the cuffs finally came off, Derek didn't jump up. He sat up slowly, brushing bits of gravel and dirt off his palms. Blood from a scrape on his elbow had soaked through his sleeve. He looked at it, then looked at Becker. "I told you to check my pocket 10 minutes ago," he said, voice even. Becker didn't respond. His jaw was tight, his hands stiff. He looked at Holt, then at Reynolds. "Why didn't you ask for ID?" "He matched the call," Holt muttered, avoiding Derek's eyes. "Did you even ask his name?" Becker snapped. Neither of them answered. Behind them, Jasmine stood at the edge of the sidewalk, phone in hand, still recording. Her dog tugged gently at the leash, but she didn't move. More neighbors were outside now, some on porches, some by their gates. People had heard the yelling. They had seen the police swarm in, guns drawn, tackle a man who had done nothing but run. One man called out from his porch, "Y'all arrested the wrong guy. Hope that camera caught everything." Derek stood up slowly, his breathing steady. He wiped the blood from his arm with the back of his sleeve. His voice was still calm, but now it carried weight. "You know how many times I've walked past this street?" he said. "You know how many times I nodded to people, said good morning, waved at kids playing on bikes?" Becker looked down, saying nothing. Derek looked at Holt and Reynolds. "You didn't ask me a thing. You decided what I was before I opened my mouth." Holt stepped forward, eyes nervous. "Look, we were responding to a call." Derek cut him off. "You were responding to your own fear, not the call." And then he turned and walked toward the sidewalk. Jasmine lowered her phone slightly, her eyes following him. He didn't say anything more. Didn't yell. Didn't threaten. He just walked away, leaving behind silence and three officers who knew they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. Derek didn't go home. He kept walking, his pace steady, not because he needed space, but because he needed control. His hands were still shaking, just slightly, not from fear, from restraint. Years in federal service had taught him how to stay calm under pressure, how to breathe through danger, how to wait for the right moment. But this wasn't a mission. This wasn't foreign soil or a high-risk operation. This was his own neighborhood, and they had tackled him like he was a criminal for jogging past trimmed hedges and flower beds. Behind him, he could still hear Becker's voice, low and tense, asking the others what they were thinking. But Derek didn't care. He'd been down this road before, not this exact street, but this kind of moment, where being calm wasn't enough, where credentials didn't matter until it was too late. He walked 2 blocks in silence before pulling out his phone. He wasn't calling his lawyer. Not yet. He called Celeste. She answered on the second ring. "You all right?" "I'm fine now," he said. There was a pause. "Tell me what happened." He told her everything. Every step, every word, every move. He kept it short, straight to the facts, but she heard the tension behind his voice. "You want me to come down there?" she asked. "Number not yet, but record everything. Get a copy of every video that hits social media. Check the neighborhood cams. Pull anything you can." "Already on it," she said without hesitation. Derek ended the call, but he didn't move right away. He stood at the corner, eyes scanning the street. A black SUV drove past slowly. The driver glanced at him, then looked away. Another neighbor across the street pretended to check their mailbox, but they were watching. Everyone was, and the story was already spreading. Jasmine's video was up on her feed within minutes. By the time Derek circled back toward the park, it had already passed 100 shares. The caption was simple. "They tackled my neighbor while he was jogging. Turns out he's Homeland Security. He sat on the same bench he passed every morning. Watched a child throw breadcrumbs to a group of birds. Watched 2 women power walk past him, whispering as they turned to look. His elbow still ached. His shirt was stained. But he looked calm, quiet, like nothing had happened. But inside, everything was shifting, because he knew this wasn't going to end at the curb. Not this time. Back at the station, the mood was different. Becker stood stiffly in the briefing room, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Officer Holt sat near the corner, eyes fixed on the floor. Reynolds leaned against the wall, arms folded, but his confidence had drained away. The silence wasn't casual. It was heavy, awkward, like something had cracked and no one knew how to patch it. Becker dropped the file onto the table. "Do either of you understand what you just did?" Reynolds cleared his throat. "It was a heat-of-the-moment mistake. The call came in, male suspect, dark clothes, running—" Becker cut him off. "So you tackled the first black man in a hoodie you saw? Didn't ask his name? Didn't ask where he was going? Didn't ask for ID?" Holt shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't know he was federal." Becker slammed his hand against the table, hard enough to make Reynolds flinch. "That's not the point." He took a breath, tried to keep his voice steady. "You didn't know he was federal because you didn't give him the chance to say a word. You jumped the gun, literally. And now? Now the video's everywhere." Holt finally looked up. "What video?" Becker turned the screen toward them. It was already on local news. Jasmine's footage. Multiple angles. From the curb. From across the street. One from a passing driver. The footage was clear. Derek with his hands up. Calm, no aggression. The takedown. The knee. The blood. The repeated request. "Check my back pocket." And then the badge. Reynolds sank deeper into his chair. It looks bad. It is bad, Becker snapped. This isn't just internal affairs. This is federal now. He didn't need to say more. Both men knew what that meant. Derek didn't just work for the government. He worked in the government. High clearance, special ops, counterterrorism. Men like him didn't let things go. They had entire departments behind them, entire buildings. Becker had dealt with complaints before, but this wasn't going to be a meeting and a warning letter. This was going to be national. He rubbed his forehead. Start writing your statements, every word, every second, because when this hits, the only thing that might keep you in uniform is a miracle. And outside, the views kept climbing. Comments piling up. Journalists reaching out. One clip already had 3 million views. The storm hadn't hit yet, but it was coming fast. Derek sat in the kitchen, staring at the slow drip of coffee into the pot. But his mind was far from the warmth of caffeine. His left arm still ached where the officers had slammed him down. He hadn't iced it yet. There hadn't been time. The house was quiet, but his phone was not. It hadn't stopped vibrating since he got back. Missed calls, texts, emails, social media tags. Some were from friends, others from people he hadn't spoken to in years. A few were complete strangers, thanking him, praising his calm, asking if he would speak out. He didn't respond to any of them. His thoughts were focused on something else, something tighter, colder, more calculated. He had dealt with tactical failures in the past, missions that went sideways, communications that broke down. But this wasn't a battlefield. This wasn't war. This was the neighborhood he lived in, where he paid taxes, where he waved at people he didn't know, where he had been tackled like an animal because he wore a hoodie and ran at the wrong time. He poured the coffee, hands steady, and stepped into the next room. Celeste was already sitting at the table, laptop open, files spread across the wood. She had always been sharp. She didn't wait to be asked. The footage was already saved on her drive, multiple copies, synced to cloud accounts in case anything was deleted. Local news headlines were pulled up, side by side with legal case studies and federal response protocols. She looked up briefly, then turned the laptop so he could see. They're already trying to spin it, she said. A department rep gave a statement that it was a case of mistaken identity and unfortunate timing. Derek gave a short breath through his nose. It wasn't a laugh. It wasn't surprise. It was what he expected. They're testing the water, he said, seeing how bad the backlash gets before they admit fault. Celeste nodded. But it's too late for that. It's viral. All 3 officers are being named online now. One of them, Reynolds. His brother's already begging people to stop messaging the family. Derek didn't smile. He didn't feel joy at their discomfort. He felt nothing. That was what worried Celeste the most. You going to file the formal complaint? She asked. Yes. And press charges? Yes. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Want me to draft the statement? He nodded once. Start with the facts. No emotion. Just what happened. Celeste started typing. Derek walked to the window and looked outside. A car passed slowly. Not unusual, but the driver had their phone pointed toward the house. The moment wasn't private anymore. The silence that had once belonged to him, to his morning runs, to the peaceful walks back from work, it was gone now, replaced by attention he never wanted, forced onto him by a moment of violence he didn't ask for. He turned back to the table. They thought they could shove it under the rug, but they picked the wrong one this time. Celeste didn't stop typing. You think they'll apologize? No, he said. They'll try to cover it, delay it, make it sound smaller than it was. But it's not. No, he repeated. It's not. He sat down and looked at the footage again, frame by frame. The look in Holt's eyes when the badge came out. The way Reynolds stepped back like he'd touched fire. Becker's silence and Derek's own face. Calm, collected, but tired. So damn tired. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened to someone like him, but it was going to be the last time it happened to him, because this time, he wasn't letting it go. By the next morning, the video had made national headlines. The footage had been clipped and shared by major news outlets, social justice pages, former law enforcement officers, and even celebrities. The image of Derek, face pressed against pavement, hoodie darkened by blood from his elbow, voice calm as he said, "Check my back pocket," was now everywhere. There was no longer room for misunderstanding. There was no blurry footage, no shaky angle, no room for doubt. The truth was out in full color, frame by frame. He watched the coverage from the edge of the living room, arms folded as his phone buzzed nonstop on the coffee table. Every anchor said the same things. A case of mistaken identity. Excessive force on an innocent man. Federal agent wrongfully arrested during morning jog. But to Derek, the words were hollow. He wasn't some stranger with a shocking headline. He was a man who got up early to run, who took care of his mother 2 streets over, who worked cases the public would never hear about. He wasn't a symbol. He was just himself. And still, that hadn't protected him. Celeste muted the TV and looked over. "Your office just sent a request. They want a sit-down, quiet meeting, off record." Derek gave a small nod. "Let them wait." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Yeah, let them sit in it for a while. Let them think about what this looks like when it's not just another black man on the news. It's one of their own." He moved into the hallway and opened the front door. Outside, reporters had already started to show up. 2 vans parked across the street, a camera crew halfway down the block. A woman with a mic and a too-wide smile waved from the sidewalk, as if smiling could make the invasion less disgusting. He closed the door without a word. There was no peace now. He turned to Celeste. "Set the meeting with internal affairs. You want media involved?" "Number, not yet." He sat down at the dining table. "Let's do this by the book, but not quietly. I want them to feel every inch of this. I want every apology to be public, every lie to be corrected with facts, every step to be watched." Celeste nodded and opened her laptop again. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Becker paced the hallway outside the chief's office. He hadn't slept. His badge felt heavier than usual. Inside the office, the chief argued with someone on the phone. Becker couldn't hear everything, but he caught the tone. Tight, defensive, tired. When the door finally opened, the chief waved him in with a gesture that said everything without a word. "Federal affairs already called," the chief said, rubbing his eyes. "They're not happy." Becker stayed quiet. "They want names, reports, copies of body cam footage, and they want it now." Becker finally spoke. "We messed up." The chief's laugh was dry. "Number, you didn't. Holt and Reynolds did. But it's on all of us now." He dropped a thick file on the desk. "You know what this is?" Becker didn't answer. "That's a list of every civil rights attorney in the county who's already contacted the press about representing him. You think this ends with a complaint? It's going to court. And once he files, you better believe this city's going to bleed money in lawsuits." Becker clenched his jaw. "I tried to pull them off. The second I saw the badge—" "Too late," the chief said, cutting him off. "Too damn late." He leaned back in his chair, his voice quieter now. "They tackled a federal agent with no cause, no warning, on camera. There's nothing we can spin, nothing we can hide." Back at the house, Derek scrolled through the emails his agency had sent overnight. Some were support, others were concern. But one stood out, an email from the deputy director himself. Short, direct. "Let us know how you want to handle this. We're ready to back you." For the first time, Derek leaned back in his chair. His jaw tightened slightly. They didn't just bruise his body. They stepped on everything he had built. His discipline, his loyalty, his work. And now everyone was watching. Not just the city, not just the state, the country. The city was holding its breath. News vans lined the street outside the station. Commentators filled the airwaves, dissecting every frame of the video. Protesters had started gathering in front of City Hall, holding signs, chanting, waiting for answers. But inside the walls of power, the people who wore badges were scrambling. At the department's legal division, folders were being passed between desks, lawyers flipping through printed screenshots, body cam logs, public statements. The department's PR head, a man named Whitaker, who had worked through more than a few scandals, paced the room with his tie loosened and his eyes bloodshot. He slammed a press release onto the conference table. This was supposed to go out this morning, acknowledging excessive force, promising retraining, community outreach, but the DA called. Said to hold it, A junior officer at the table looked up. Why? Whitaker didn't even glance at him. Because they know what's coming. A civil suit, federal involvement, possibly even a congressional hearing if this keeps spreading. They don't want to admit guilt before the lawyers get a chance to make deals. One of the department's internal affairs investigators, a woman named Clara Reyes, had been assigned to handle the internal review. She wasn't new, and she wasn't known for being soft. She had a reputation, clean, thorough, and impossible to intimidate. She stood up from her seat, hands clasped behind her back. I already reviewed the body cam footage. It confirms what's in the viral video, she said. He gave them a chance to stop. He asked them to check his ID. He didn't resist, didn't run, didn't even raise his voice. They used force anyway. Whitaker sighed. So what's your recommendation? She didn't hesitate. Suspension without pay, pending termination. Both officers, and we issue a public apology signed by the chief, the mayor, and the DA. Someone at the table scoffed. You're handing the city's head on a platter. Reyes didn't flinch. The city's head is already on a platter. The only question is whether we climb into the fire voluntarily or get dragged in. Back at Derek's house, Celeste was finishing the first draft of the formal complaint. She had already filed a request for public records, body cam footage, dispatch recordings, internal memos, everything. And responses had started to come in faster than expected. Some people in the system wanted this cleaned up just as much as Derek did. But it wasn't about one arrest anymore. The deeper they went, the more things started to crack. She looked up from the screen. You might want to see this. Derek walked over, reading the message on her laptop. To Internal Affairs from Officer Jeremy Sloan. Subject, incident involving federal agent. This isn't the first time Holt's gone after someone who didn't fit. Last year, same neighborhood, no footage that time. The kid didn't file a complaint, but he was innocent too. I didn't say anything then. I should have. Derek leaned against the edge of the table. His face didn't change, but Celeste saw it. That flash in his eyes, not anger, not pain, resolve. They've done this before, she said quietly. They got away with it before, he corrected. He walked to the window again. Reporters were still outside, but now a few police cruisers had shown up too. Not to arrest him, just to keep the peace. But the symbolism wasn't lost on him. They had come in force to tackle him without a word. Now they were there to protect the people watching him. He turned back. Has anyone contacted the mayor's office? Celeste nodded. They tried to set up a private meeting. I don't want a private meeting, he said. They tried to bury this. I want the next thing they say to be at a podium. He picked up the folder Celeste had put together. Inside were names, badge numbers, timestamps, screenshots of news coverage, legal language, and a single copy of his ID, folded neatly, the badge tucked inside. The same one that had changed everything. He slid the folder into a bag, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. Celeste stood. Where are you going? Downtown, he said. I gave them a chance to fix this. Now I'm going to make sure they can't ignore it. As he opened the door, a dozen microphones turned his way. Flashes popped. Voices shouted. Reporters pressed forward. But Derek didn't speak. Not yet. He got into the car, closed the door behind him, and drove off, leaving behind the noise, the questions, the cameras. He wasn't walking away from the fight. He was bringing it to their doorstep. City Hall was louder than usual. The sound wasn't from arguments or announcements. It came from the people gathering outside, spilling into the sidewalk with handmade signs, bullhorns, and cell phones raised high in the air. The chants were steady, clear, and full of purpose. Justice for the Jogger. Fire the officers. Badge doesn't change the truth. It proves it. Inside the building, the tension ran just as high, but no one dared speak above a whisper. Security stood near every door, nervous but trying not to show it. The mayor was behind closed doors with his communications team, pacing the floor, stopping every few minutes to glare at the TV screen, playing a silent loop of the arrest video. He turned toward his aide. How much longer until the press conference? 30 minutes, she replied. But the reporters are already packed into the room. He checked his watch, then looked down at the carefully worded statement he was supposed to read. drafted by the legal team, edited by PR. It said all the right things, but none of them felt like enough. Not anymore. Because this wasn't just another headline. This wasn't a story that would vanish in 3 news cycles. This was different. This had a face, a name, a badge. Downstairs in the wide marble lobby, Derek stepped through the front doors with calm steps. He wore the same jacket from the morning of the arrest. Not because he hadn't changed clothes. He had. But he put the jacket back on before coming here, because it still had the scuff from where his shoulder hit the pavement. It was the reminder he needed. Celeste walked beside him, holding the folder they had built together. It wasn't just a formal complaint anymore. It was a collection of evidence. Factual, ordered, undeniable. As they approached the reception desk, the building grew quiet, as if the walls themselves knew something had shifted. The clerk behind the desk stood as soon as he saw them. "They're expecting you." 2 city staffers walked them to the elevator. No words spoken, just a few quick glances. Everyone recognized him now, not because of his work, not because of his years of federal service, but because of what had been done to him. As the elevator rose, Derek didn't check his phone. He didn't check his notes. He didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already happened on camera. This meeting wasn't to tell his side. It was to confirm that the people who had failed him were now forced to face him. When the doors opened, he stepped into a private meeting room. The mayor, the police chief, the city attorney, and a representative from the governor's office were seated at the long table. Bottles of water lined up neatly, untouched. The air felt like it was holding its breath. The mayor stood first, offering a handshake Derek didn't take. There was an awkward second before he sat back down, adjusting his suit, trying to recover control. "We appreciate you taking the time to meet," the mayor said. Derek took his seat but said nothing. Celeste placed the folder in front of her, opened it slowly, and turned the first page. "We've reviewed everything," the city attorney said, "and we understand the seriousness of the situation. We're prepared to issue a public statement, acknowledge the error, and discuss compensation." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Compensation?" The attorney nodded. "We know you're filing suit. We're willing to negotiate before that step becomes necessary." Derek leaned forward. His voice was calm but carried weight that silenced the room. "You think I came here for money?" There was a pause. No one answered. "I came here because your officers tackled a federal agent without a question. Because they thought a black man in a hoodie meant threat. Because even after I told them who I was, they kept pressing me into the ground like that badge meant nothing. I came here because if I wasn't who I am, if I didn't have the title, the clearance, the record, you'd still be defending what they did." The police chief shifted in his seat. "We've suspended the officers. There's a review underway." "That's not enough," Derek said, cutting him off. The mayor cleared his throat. "What would you consider enough?" Celeste slid a new sheet across the table. "Termination of both officers. Immediate. Not after review, not after press fades. Now public apology from this office, the department, and the DA's office. And a citywide training overhaul to prevent this from happening again." The governor's representative spoke for the first time. "That's a lot to ask." Derek turned his eyes toward him. "Number what they did was a lot. What we're asking for is just the bare minimum." He stood up slowly, carefully, like he was giving them time to think. "I'm not here for backroom deals. You've got 24 hours. After that, everything goes public. Full lawsuit, federal review. Every file we've gathered goes into the press." He paused at the door. "Oh, and if you plan to hold that press conference in 30 minutes, he added, "you might want to rewrite your speech." And then he walked out. Not one person in that room moved for several seconds, because they knew the storm they were trying to avoid had already arrived, and it was calm, well-dressed, and impossible to silence. The press conference was delayed by almost an hour. Reporters packed into the city's media hall, their voices overlapping, cameras flashing every few seconds, tripods adjusted, microphones clipped to collars, live feeds counting down in red numbers. Outside, the chants hadn't slowed. In fact, they'd gotten louder. What started as a few voices on a sidewalk had become a crowd wrapped around the block, people spilling into the street with signs raised above their heads. "Jogging is not a crime. Badge or no badge, he was still a man. Fire them now! When the mayor finally stepped out from behind the curtain, the noise quieted, not because the crowd respected him, but because they were waiting to hear whether he would say what needed to be said or whether he would waste their time with polished lies. He stood behind the podium, throat dry, fingers gripping the paper in front of him. The cameras were rolling, phones were streaming. One wrong word and the story would double in size by the hour. He began reading from the page. Good afternoon. On behalf of the city, we acknowledge the events that occurred earlier this week involving Mr. Derek Harper, a resident and federal agent. There were murmurs from the crowd, some sighs, some scoffs, using his name now. They hadn't used it in the first release. We recognize that the actions taken by officers on scene were not only inappropriate, but unacceptable under any policy or justification. Mr. Harper was wrongfully detained, subjected to unnecessary force, and disrespected despite his full cooperation. He paused, looked up, then set the paper down. But more than that, Mr. Harper was treated the way too many black men are treated in this country, guilty until proven innocent. His badge shouldn't have been the reason we listen. His uniform shouldn't have been the difference between him being a threat or being respected. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some of them expected rehearsed damage control, but not this. Not yet. The mayor exhaled. I've spoken to Mr. Harper, not in secret, not behind closed doors. He came here and laid out what justice would look like. And I'm here to say, we're following through. Flashes exploded across the room. Reporters leaned forward. Effective immediately, both officers involved have been terminated. Their records flagged for federal review. The department is undergoing mandatory use of force retraining. The city will issue a formal apology, not just today but permanently, in policy, practice, and reform. And yes, Mr. Harper has every right to seek legal action. We will not fight that process. We will not silence it. He stepped back, breathing harder now. The statement was over. The fallout just beginning. Questions flew at him about accountability, lawsuits, prior complaints, race, training, trust. But he didn't answer any of them. He simply walked off the stage and disappeared behind the curtain, leaving the noise to fight itself. Meanwhile, in a quiet diner a few blocks away, Derek watched it all from a booth near the window. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just stirred the spoon in his untouched coffee, watching the mayor's speech replay across the screen in front of him. Celeste sat across from him, arms folded. She glanced around the room, people watching the same news, whispering, pointing. Some looked guilty, others confused. One older man walked past their booth, slowed for a second, then simply said, "I'm sorry, sir." Derek looked up, held his eyes for a moment, and said nothing. The man nodded and kept walking. "You got what you asked for," Celeste said quietly. Derek's eyes stayed on the screen. "It's not about me." "I know," she replied, "but still, it matters." He took a breath and leaned back. "It's the first time I've seen them say it out loud. The first time I've seen a mayor admit it wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern, a problem." Celeste nodded. "You forced their hand." "No," Derek said. "They forced their own. I just didn't let them hide it this time." The server came by to refill their coffee. She didn't say much, but her hands were a little shaky. She knew who he was. Everyone in the city did now. As the press conference ended, news anchors began dissecting every line, every promise. Some called it a political move. Others said it was long overdue. But none of them could change the fact that Derek hadn't filed his lawsuit yet, and the city knew that when he did, there would be more headlines, more questions, more truth. Across town, in a narrow office with heavy blinds, a man named Russell Avery sat alone behind his desk. He was the lead investigator from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, and he had just finished reading every report, every transcript, every piece of media related to Derek's case. He picked up the phone and made a call. "Send a team out there," he said. "Not to review it, to open it. This isn't just a case. This is a sign, and we need to make sure it doesn't get buried when the cameras turn off." The case wasn't closed. It was just beginning to wake up the rest of the country. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning, just after sunrise. The legal document was 73 pages long, clean, detailed, and damning. It outlined every moment of Derek's arrest, backed by time-stamped footage, witness statements, audio transcriptions from police radios, and internal reports leaked through channels no one was supposed to touch. It named names: Officer Ryan Holt, Officer Andrew Reynolds, Sergeant William Becker. It named the department, it named the city, and it didn't just stop there. The complaint included 2 additional incidents tied to Officer Holt from the previous year. 2 young black men, both in their 20s, both stopped by Holt under questionable circumstances. No arrests were made, no charges filed, but both had filed complaints that mysteriously went nowhere. Now those complaints were back, attached as exhibits, building a clear picture of a man who had treated his power like a weapon for years, and a department that had turned its head every single time. By noon, every major outlet had published it. The hashtags were trending again. But this time it wasn't just justice for Derek. It was fire the whole system. Not just one officer. Policy is not protection. Derek didn't hold a press conference. He didn't do interviews. He let the paper speak for itself. But the impact was immediate. The city's legal department went into emergency meetings. Local radio ran segments for hours. Callers weighing in from all over. Some shocked, others not surprised at all. A few tried to defend the officers. They were shut down almost instantly. That same day, Celeste received a message from a quiet but important source. A federal agent stationed out of the regional Homeland Office. It read, "2 of the names on your complaint are being flagged in other departments. Don't stop. Keep pushing." Later that evening, Derek sat alone on the front steps of his house, looking out at the street where it all started. It was calm now. Too calm. The reporters had mostly moved on. The protesters had shifted their energy toward the courthouse. Even the neighbors who once waved from porches now only nodded from a distance. Some were supportive. Others didn't know what to say. Or maybe they were embarrassed. Maybe they just didn't want to admit that they had watched a man be tackled feet from their flower beds and said nothing. Celeste stepped outside holding a folder. She didn't say anything right away, just sat beside him. After a minute, she handed him the file. "These are the people reaching out to help," she said. "Attorneys, activists, journalists. Some are trying to get interviews. Others just want to make sure this doesn't lose steam." Derek flipped through the pages. Some names he recognized, others he didn't. But all of them knew one thing now, that what had happened wasn't just about him being a federal agent. It was about how easily everything he was could have been erased because someone didn't like the color of his skin and the speed of his feet. He closed the folder and stared out at the street again. "You know what I keep thinking about?" he said. Celeste turned to him. "That moment when I was face down, and I told them to check my pocket, and Holt ignored me like I hadn't spoken at all, like my voice didn't matter, like the only thing he saw was a threat." Celeste's voice was soft. "He wanted you to stay invisible." Derek nodded. "And now they're mad I won't disappear." There was a long silence between them. Not heavy, not angry, just still. Then Celeste added, "I saw the look on Becker's face. When he read your badge, it wasn't guilt, it was fear." "Fear of what?" "Fear of accountability. Fear that this time, it wouldn't get swept under the rug." Derek let out a breath, long and slow. "That's what's got them shaking," he said. "Not the video, not the lawsuit. It's that someone like me, someone they thought they could silence, stood up in front of a podium and said, 'You don't get to decide who deserves justice.'" A car passed by slowly. A teen on a bike waved. A small sign had been taped to the stop sign on the corner. It read, "Joggers live here. Respect our pace." Derek's lips twitched into the smallest smile. "They thought it would be over by now," Celeste said. "It's just getting started," Derek replied. He stood, stretched his shoulders, and picked up the folder. His back straight, his pace calm, his presence steady. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every person who'd ever been slammed to the ground and told their story didn't matter. And now, finally, the country was being forced to listen. 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, the city was under more pressure than it had ever seen. Not because of riots, not because of looting or fire, but because it couldn't breathe without hearing the name Derek Harper. Every committee, council, news outlet, and neighborhood meeting mentioned him. His story was no longer just a case. It had become a test of whether a city built on polite conversations and polished politics would actually confront what it didn't want to admit. And the cracks were beginning to show. Officer Holt had gone silent. No interviews, no statements, not even a lawyer at first. He had gone from patrolling streets to hiding inside his sister's basement across the county line. A local paper had published a story about how he'd been under investigation twice before for aggressive stops, both cases dismissed by lack of evidence. But now journalists had the evidence, and they weren't letting go. Reynolds tried to save himself. He gave a statement through his lawyer, calling the arrest a tragic misjudgment and claiming he had only followed the lead of his superior. But the footage didn't support him. Not when he was the one who knelt on Derek's legs. Not when his voice was heard laughing just seconds after Derek hit the pavement. As for Sergeant Becker, he had done what most senior officers do when the storm rolls in. He resigned. Quietly. No press conference. No farewell. Just a folded-up letter and an empty office chair. Internal Affairs called it a personnel adjustment, but to the public it looked like retreat, like guilt. And yet none of this satisfied the people on the ground. Not the activists standing on courthouse steps in the rain. Not the teachers bringing the case into classrooms to talk about fear and fairness. Not the mother in the grocery store aisle who pulled Derek aside just to say, "I have 2 sons. Thank you for not walking away." Because this wasn't about revenge. No one was asking for pain. They were asking for answers, for change, for someone, anyone in power to say, "We were wrong and we're going to fix it." But the system, slow and defensive, still wanted to protect itself. The district attorney, a man named Joel Sanderson, had been unusually quiet since the story broke. In his 10 years of service, he had built a reputation on being fair, careful, meticulous. But now every silence from his office felt like complicity, until the leak. Late on a Friday night, a copy of an internal memo from Sanderson's office was anonymously emailed to 2 reporters and 3 civil rights organizations. It wasn't long, just 2 pages, but the content shook the city. In the memo, Sanderson advised his senior staff to limit engagement on the Harper case and avoid triggering disciplinary escalation until federal pressure requires action. He didn't want to act. He wanted to wait. Wait for the noise to die down. Wait for the headlines to fade. Wait for people to forget. But they weren't forgetting. The memo spread like wildfire. Hashtags exploded again. Limit engagement became a rallying cry. Protesters printed it on banners, painted it on sidewalks, turned it into chants. Limit engagement? We demand response. We demand truth. We demand justice. That Monday morning, the courthouse was packed. And Derek, he didn't stand on the steps. He didn't shout through a megaphone. He walked through the doors, filed a new motion to amend the lawsuit, and added Sanderson's name to the list. Civil negligence, obstruction of accountability, deliberate delay of justice. The press lost its mind. CNN ran the story top of the hour. National morning shows brought in legal analysts. Civil rights lawyers across the country weighed in. But what Derek focused on that day wasn't the press. It wasn't the sound bites or applause. It was the faces of 2 young boys sitting outside the courtroom with their mother. They were holding small cardboard signs that simply read, "He looks like my dad." He paused when he saw them, gave a small nod. One of the boys gave a shy wave. Derek reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded envelope, and handed it to their mother. "Make sure they read this," he said. She opened it after he walked inside. It was a printed copy of the lawsuit summary and a handwritten note at the bottom. "You don't have to wear a badge to matter. You don't have to work for the government to deserve respect. This fight isn't mine anymore. It's theirs too." Inside the courthouse, the judge was already reviewing the motion. Lawyers scrambled to adjust their defenses. The city's legal team called emergency meetings with the DA's office. And Derek sat, calm, centered, watching the system from inside its own walls. He knew what it looked like when people thought they could wait out the truth. He knew what it meant when silence was used as a shield. But this time, he wasn't backing down. And this time, they weren't going to outlast him. 2 months had passed since the day Derek hit the pavement. What had started as a brutal mistake now sat at the center of a federal investigation, 3 civil suits, and a national conversation that refused to quiet down. News vans were no longer parked outside his house, but his name hadn't faded. It lived in headlines, classrooms, legislative halls, and most importantly, in living rooms where families were finally having conversations they had avoided for years. But behind the viral momentum and courtroom battles, the work was far from over. Inside a modest community center on the city's south side, Derek stood at the front of a crowded room. No cameras, no microphones, just folding chairs, quiet parents, teenagers with crossed arms, elders with searching eyes. The room was packed wall to wall. They weren't there to cheer. They weren't there to protest. They were there to understand. "I didn't come here today to talk about the lawsuit," Derek said, voice steady, hands clasped in front of him. "That's already moving. I came here to talk about what happens when this kind of thing doesn't make the news." A low hum of murmurs followed. Everyone in the room knew what he meant. They had seen it, lived it, called it out only to be ignored or silenced. Derek walked slowly between the rows of chairs. "We've seen this before. Someone brutalized, arrested, harassed, and nothing comes from it. The difference this time isn't just that I had a badge. It's that everything was caught on camera, and I had the resources to fight back." He stopped and turned. "But what about the people who don't? What happens to the kid who's 16, scared, doesn't have a lawyer, doesn't have anyone to film it, doesn't even know his rights?" Silence. He let it sit in the room like a mirror, forcing everyone to look at it. Then he continued. "I'm not here to be a symbol. I'm not interested in fame. What I want is for this city to stop building a system that only listens when a man wears a badge." The crowd responded this time, not with applause, but with nods. Quiet agreement. A few "mm-hms" under breaths. A teacher near the back stood up. "How do we change it?" Derek turned to face her. "We start by educating ourselves. Not just kids, but adults. Know your rights. Know what the law says. Know what it doesn't say. And most importantly, document everything. If they know they're being watched, they'll think twice." An older man raised a hand. "What about the department? Any chance they'll really change?" Derek didn't sugarcoat it. "They'll change if they're forced to. They'll change if every lie is met with facts, if every delay is met with exposure, if every unjust stop is followed by 10 more people asking why." The community meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. People asked questions, shared stories, offered ideas. Celeste took notes in the corner, listening more than speaking, documenting every request. Derek stayed until the last person left, shaking hands, offering quiet words of encouragement. Afterward, they sat on the hood of his car beneath the streetlight outside. "You think any of it sticks?" Celeste asked, stretching her legs. Derek looked up at the dim stars above the city skyline. "Some of it will." She glanced over at him. "You're different lately." He raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Before all this, you lived quiet, clean, low profile, in and out of jobs without leaving a ripple." He nodded. "I had to. Being invisible felt safer. But now?" He paused, then said, "Now I know being invisible doesn't protect you. Not when someone already sees you as a threat." They sat in silence a moment longer. Then Celeste pulled out her phone and opened a message she hadn't shown him earlier. It was from the Department of Justice. "Preliminary findings confirm pattern of biased stops and disproportionate use of force. Formal federal oversight request is in motion. Prepare for testimony." Derek read it twice, then handed the phone back. "They're coming," he said. "They have to," Celeste replied. As they drove away, neither of them said a word, but the gravity was clear. What started with 2 cruisers, a hoodie, and a morning jog had now pulled the federal government into a city investigation. It had exposed cracks no one could ignore anymore. It had made the invisible visible, and it was beginning to shake the very system that once told him to lie still, stay quiet, and hope for mercy. But Derek wasn't hoping anymore. He was making sure no one would ever forget what they tried to erase. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning inside a packed federal building that stood just beyond the city limits. It was the kind of place that didn't attract attention. Gray walls, tight elevators, metal detectors, quiet halls. But today it hummed with a tension that couldn't be ignored. This wasn't a criminal trial. It wasn't a local court date. This was bigger. A congressional subcommittee hearing opened under the Civil Rights Oversight Act, investigating the city's patterns of policing, racial profiling, and administrative failure to discipline abuse of power. The mayor had been summoned, so had the chief of police, so had the city's legal director, and so had Derek Harper. He arrived wearing a plain suit, no flag pins, no flashy tie, just navy blue, crisp and clean. His badge wasn't on display. He hadn't brought it. He wanted them to see the man, not the title. Reporters waited at the sidewalk, camera lights blinking like stars in reverse. But this time he didn't stop for questions. He walked past the flashing lights and noise like he couldn't hear it, because none of it mattered unless something changed inside those walls. Inside the hearing room, rows of seats were already filled. Lawyers, activists, retired judges, teachers, students. Some wore shirts with his name, others held silent signs. But they all came for the same reason: to witness what so many thought they'd never see: real accountability. The committee chair, a woman from North Carolina with a long record of civil rights cases, called the hearing to order. Her voice was firm, direct, no nonsense. This wasn't political theater. This was a reckoning. The mayor spoke first. His words were polished but hollow. He called the events unfortunate and promised systemic improvement. But he couldn't explain why the department had dismissed earlier complaints. He couldn't explain why those officers had kept their jobs after years of warning signs. Then came the police chief. His testimony was slower, careful. He admitted mistakes. But when pressed on internal culture, on why body cam footage had to go viral before action was taken, he shifted blame to imperfect procedures and the challenges of high-pressure policing. By the time Derek was called to the stand, the room was silent. No whispers, no coughs, just eyes locked on the man who had become both symbol and voice. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, then took his seat. His opening statement wasn't long. He didn't need it to be. "I've spent my career identifying threats," he said. "Real ones. People who mean harm to this country. And never, not once, did I think the people in my own neighborhood would treat me like the enemy. Until they did." He paused. "I wasn't assaulted because I was dangerous. I was assaulted because they assumed I was. And that assumption didn't come from data. It came from skin, from bias, from a system that trained them to see someone like me as a threat before I said a single word." A committee member leaned forward. "Mr. Harper, in your view, is this an isolated case?" Derek looked him directly in the eyes. "Number. It's not isolated. It's documented. You have the files. You've seen the complaints. You've seen the video. What happened to me is just what happened to someone the system couldn't ignore. But there are hundreds of others who never got this room, this microphone, this attention, and most of them didn't have a badge to prove their worth." Another member asked, "What do you want us to do?" "I don't want anything," Derek said, "but the people do. They want policy, not promises. They want action, not apologies." "You want a solution? Start with mandatory bias training with real oversight, independent review boards with teeth, civilian panels with subpoena power. Make officers fear the consequence of lying as much as they fear the truth being known." He stopped there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't break down. He didn't try to perform. He simply told them what no one else had dared to say out loud under oath. The chairwoman nodded slowly, looking down at her notes, then back at the room. "We hear you, Mr. Harper," she said, "and more importantly, we believe you." After the hearing, the hallway filled with reporters, but Derek didn't speak to them. He walked past the flashing bulbs, past the eager microphones, past the sound bites begging for headlines. He had already said everything that mattered. Back outside, Celeste was waiting beside the car. She'd watched the whole thing from the overflow room. She didn't say anything right away, just opened the door for him. "You did good," she said softly as he got in. He gave her a tired look. "I didn't come to do good. I came to tell the truth." She nodded. Sometimes they're the same thing. As they drove away, traffic crawled. The city didn't look different. The buildings were still gray. The roads still cracked. But something had shifted. Inside those walls, truth had been spoken, loud enough, sharp enough, and clear enough that no one could pretend they hadn't heard it. And now, with every mile that passed, Derek knew the case might still be open. But the silence that protected it had been broken. And that sound, the sound of truth finally echoing in halls built to deny it, was louder than anything he'd ever heard. The weeks that followed the hearing moved slowly, but the air felt charged, like something large was shifting beneath the surface, even if it wasn't visible yet. On paper, not much had changed. The lawsuits were still in motion. The DOJ hadn't announced formal oversight yet. The city council meetings continued, each filled with new language about reforms, reviews, and proposed changes. But people were watching now, closely, and the ones who had always been unheard were finally speaking without asking for permission. One by one, stories began surfacing. Not new incidents, but old ones. Cases from 5, 10 years ago. Some were buried in files. Others had never been filed at all. A man who was tackled outside his apartment while taking out trash. A teenager stopped and cuffed for looking nervous. A woman dragged from her car with her infant in the back seat because her taillight was out. None of these cases had gone viral. No badges, no high clearance. Just pain written in silence. But now silence had a crack in it, and truth was leaking through. Derek read each one as it came out, every headline, every thread. He sat in the back of council chambers during hearings, not as a speaker, just a presence, just a reminder. The city officials noticed. The people noticed too. One evening, after another long council meeting, a man in his early 60s approached him quietly. Worn cap, tired eyes. "I'm not here to say thank you," the man said. Derek nodded once. "All right. I'm here to say sorry," the man continued. "I worked in the department years ago. We used to joke about this kind of thing. We didn't call it racism. We just said, knows how to spot trouble." He looked down. But it wasn't trouble, it was fear, and now I see what it cost. Derek looked at him for a long second, then said, "Better to see it now than never." The man nodded, swallowed, and walked away. That same week, the DA, Joel Sanderson, the one who had advised limited engagement, announced he would not be seeking re-election. The leaked memo had destroyed his credibility. What hurt him most wasn't Derek's lawsuit. It was the voice of the public who had once supported him. Now his town halls were empty, his volunteers silent. He left the office with a folded speech and no applause. And still, Derek didn't celebrate. This wasn't a game. There were no winners here. Every step forward came from pain. Every reform came from what should never have happened. So when people asked how he felt about the progress, he gave them the same answer every time. It's not about progress, it's about responsibility. Celeste, who had been by his side through everything, noticed the change in him. He was quieter now, but not from exhaustion, from clarity, from knowing the work was no longer reactive. It was now about building something better, not just exposing the cracks, but showing how to seal them. One night after a long call with legal counsel about the next steps in court, she sat beside him at the kitchen table, both of them drinking from chipped mugs of tea. "You know they're going to ask you to run for something soon," she said casually. He raised an eyebrow. "Not politics," he said. "Not yet," she smirked. He shook his head. "This isn't about becoming someone else. It's about not being erased." Celeste looked at him for a long moment. "You're not being erased, Derek. You're becoming permanent." Outside, a breeze moved through the empty street. No reporters, no lights, just the sound of night reclaiming its stillness. The same corner where he had once been tackled was now covered in fresh chalk messages. Children had drawn stars and hearts, with one simple line in big letters: "We see you now." Derek stood from the table and walked to the front porch. The night was cool. The same hoodie from that morning months ago now hung on a hook by the door, stained at the elbow, faded at the seams. He didn't wear it anymore, but he hadn't thrown it away. Some things you keep, not for comfort, but to remember what forgetting costs. He looked at the streetlights glowing dimly. He thought of the kids growing up on that block, thought of the people who still ran with one headphone out, just in case. And in that quiet, he didn't think about lawsuits or headlines or hearings. He thought about accountability. He thought about visibility. He thought about staying visible, even when it hurt, because the day they stopped seeing him was the day it would all begin again. And that he couldn't allow. The day of the final court ruling arrived with no drama, no spectacle. There were no helicopters circling overhead, no lines of reporters camped outside the courthouse. The city had grown used to the presence of Derek Harper, and with time, the noise around his name had softened, not because people forgot, but because his presence had become woven into the city's reality. He was no longer just a man in a hoodie on a quiet morning street. He had become something more enduring, an anchor that held the truth in place when systems tried to drift from it. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. The case had dragged for months. Motions filed, statements made. The city's lawyers had worked hard to shift the narrative, to soften the language, to argue that the situation had been fluid and the misidentification unfortunate but understandable. But every attempt to redirect the blame had collapsed under the weight of evidence, under the clarity of the footage, and under the steady, unwavering account that Derek had maintained from the beginning. He sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, dressed in the same style he always wore. Clean suit, no frills, expression calm. Celeste sat beside him, fingers laced together, jaw tight. Behind them, rows of community members, legal observers, and journalists filled the benches. Some faces he recognized, others he didn't. But they were all there because of what had started that morning, the moment he hit the pavement, and the world was forced to look. The judge entered, a stern-faced woman known for ruling without theatrics. She didn't clear her throat dramatically or scan the room for effect. She simply opened the folder in front of her, adjusted her glasses, and began reading. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Derek Harper, on all counts. There was no explosion of noise, no clapping, just silence. The kind of silence that comes not from shock, but from release, from something long held finally being set down. The court further rules, the judge continued, that the city of Rockford failed to uphold its responsibility in enforcing fair, unbiased policing and neglected to act on prior warnings regarding misconduct by multiple officers named in the case. Derek didn't move. The judge went on, listing the damages: financial compensation, disciplinary orders, federal oversight mandates. The sum awarded was large, yes, but money was never the point. The ruling also forced the creation of a civilian accountability board, full release of public records in police misconduct cases, and mandatory retraining for every officer in the department, led by external, independent experts. This wasn't just a win, it was a blueprint, something that other cities would soon study, something others would try to follow. When the hearing ended, Derek stood slowly. His hands were steady, his face unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply looked toward the gallery, toward the quiet teacher who had once spoken up during a town hall, the teenage boy who had asked him for advice outside the community center, the mother who had pressed his hand and whispered, "Don't let them change your truth." Celeste leaned toward him. "It's over." "No," he said gently. "It's just written down now." They left the courthouse the same way they'd come in, quietly, with heads held high. Outside, there was a small group gathered. No cameras, just people, neighbors. A few teens holding signs that simply read, "Justice means you're seen." A boy no older than 13 stepped forward and held out a folded paper. Derek took it. Inside was a drawing, him mid-jog, with a gold badge shining under his hoodie. The caption beneath it read, "He didn't stop running, so we don't have to." Derek crouched and looked the boy in the eyes. "You made this?" The boy nodded. "Then you keep it," Derek said, handing it back. "So you remember what you're capable of." He stood, nodded once to the group, and walked away with Celeste by his side. They didn't talk much during the drive home. The city passed by their windows quieter than usual, not in mourning, but in reflection, a kind of stillness that comes when people realize they've been part of something they can't undo. Back at the house, the old hoodie still hung on the hook near the door, sleeves still worn, elbows still stained. Derek paused in front of it for a moment. Then, for the first time in months, he reached for it, not to wear, but to place it in a box. He folded it carefully, tucked it between old photos and documents, and closed the lid. Not to forget, but to preserve. He stepped back outside as the sky dimmed, casting long shadows on the sidewalk, the same one where it all began. And in the distance, a jogger passed by. Not him, someone younger, someone free. He watched them for a long second, then turned back toward his porch. The battle wasn't over, but it had been written into history now. And that, more than anything else, meant it could no longer be denied. Not by officers, not by politicians, not by silence. It was truth, finally rooted, and it would stand long after the cameras disappeared. If this story moved you, hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories just like this.